At the ranch, the cowboy said, "Come to the stable, I've got something big to show you." It was a dry summer afternoon, the kind where the sun pressed down so hard on the dust that every breath carried a taste of earth and heat. I wasn't supposed to stay long at the ranch, but the moment I met him, that changed. There was something about the way he looked at me, calm, steady, almost like he could see right through the version of myself I showed the world. He wasn't like the men I was used to. Worn jeans, boots caked with dust, a smile that seemed to hold back more stories than he'd ever tell. The kind of man who belonged to the land itself. And yet, when his eyes met mine, it felt like he was searching for something far beyond fences and pastures. I thought it would stay simple, just small talk, a few shared moments, and then I'd be gone. But he caught me off guard when he leaned closer, his voice low and deliberate. "Come with me to the stable. I've got something big to show you." I didn't know what he meant, and maybe I didn't want to. All I knew was that my heart was already racing, and every step I took beside him pulled me deeper into something I couldn't quite name. If you've ever found yourself standing at the edge of a moment that could change everything, where curiosity collides with desire and fear mixes with hope, then you know exactly how I felt that day. Stay with me, because this story will take you into a world of unexpected emotions, hidden truths, and choices that can't be undone. And before we start, don't forget, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what happens next. Because trust me, once you step into that stable with me, you won't want to turn back. The first time I set foot on that ranch, I thought it would be nothing more than a short visit, an afternoon to clear my head, maybe help out with a few chores, then return to my life in the city. But from the moment I saw him, leaning against the wooden fence with the sun dropping low behind him, everything inside me shifted. He was a cowboy in the truest sense of the word, though not the kind you see in movies. His shirt was worn from the heat, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong arms that carried years of labor. His boots were scuffed, his jeans faded, and his hat-shaded eyes that felt older than the man himself. There was something timeless about him, as if the land and the cattle and the dust had carved his spirit into something solid, unmovable. And yet, when those eyes found me, I didn't feel small, I felt seen. I pretended not to notice the way my chest tightened, how every step closer to him made the ground under my boots feel unsteady. He greeted me with a nod, his voice deep and steady, like a song carried through the wind. "You don't look like you belong here," he said, not unkindly. I laughed softly, trying to brush off the nervousness that bubbled inside me. "I probably don't." His lips curled into the faintest grin. "Doesn't mean you can't stay." The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, like the air before a storm. I followed him as he led me across the yard, past the creaking windmill and toward the rows of stables that smelled of hay and warm earth. Horses shifted inside, snorting and stomping, their presence grounding me even as my thoughts drifted elsewhere, toward him. We didn't talk much at first. He asked where I was from, and I told him about the city, about how noise filled every corner of my life. He chuckled, saying he couldn't imagine trading open skies for traffic lights. I wanted to argue, to explain the appeal of anonymity, but the truth was, I already knew he was right. The silence out there was intoxicating, and his voice in it felt like the only sound that mattered. Then, out of nowhere, he glanced at me with a half-smile, the kind that suggested he carried a secret. "Come with me," he said, "to the stable. I've got something big to show you." His words landed heavier than he realized. Or maybe he did realize. My pulse quickened, heat rushing to my face despite the cooling evening air. I told myself it was nothing, that he probably wanted to show me a horse, maybe some new equipment. But the way his tone lingered, low and deliberate, made me wonder if I was stepping into something I wasn't ready for. Still I followed. The stable doors groaned as he pushed them open, and the scent of fresh hay and leather filled the air. Inside, golden shafts of light cut through the cracks in the wood, illuminating dust that floated like tiny stars around us. He walked ahead, his shoulders broad and sure, his movements unhurried, as though he knew I'd follow no matter where he led. I trailed behind, my mind racing. Every detail of him demanded my attention. The way his shirt clung to his back, the sound of his boots against the dirt, the curve of his neck when he tilted his head toward me. I hated how aware I was, how desperate I felt just to stay near him. Finally, he stopped beside one of the stalls. Inside was a magnificent stallion, its coat black as midnight, mane flowing down in waves. The horse pawed the ground, snorting softly as the cowboy rested a hand on its neck. "This is Thunder," he said, his voice gentler now. "Strongest horse I've ever raised. Temper's wild, but he listens to me." I moved closer, mesmerized by both the animal and the way he touched it, with confidence, with trust. I reached out tentatively, and the stallion tossed its head before settling, as if it sensed something in me I couldn't name. He glanced at me, and in that instant, the horse no longer mattered. His eyes locked on mine, steady and unreadable, and my breath caught in my chest. "You've got to earn his trust," he said softly. "Takes time. Patience. But once he gives it, it's for life." His words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning I wasn't sure he intended, or maybe he did. My heart hammered as I struggled to reply, as if he weren't just talking about the horse but about something else entirely. Something between us. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. His gaze held me, rooted me, made me feel like running and staying all at once. Then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, he stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that his arm brushed against mine. My entire world narrowed to that single point of contact, that fleeting touch that seemed to set fire to every nerve in my body. And then he leaned in. Not enough to close the distance, not enough to be certain of his intention, but enough to leave me trembling with possibility. The horse snorted loudly, breaking the moment, and he pulled back slightly, his lips curling into a half-smile that only deepened my confusion. "What were you about to say?" he asked, his voice low, almost daring me. But the words stuck in my throat. All I knew was that something had shifted, something I couldn't ignore anymore. And as the stable doors creaked again in the wind, I realized that whatever he was holding back, I was about to find out. The stable became our world that evening, though I didn't realize it until much later. The scent of hay and leather clung to me, the golden light fading to twilight, shadows stretching across the wooden beams. He lingered close enough that I could feel the energy pulsing off him, but far enough to keep me guessing. I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, the way he had said, "Come to the stable. I've got something big to show you." At first, I thought it was just about the horse, Thunder, the restless black stallion whose wildness mirrored something I couldn't quite name inside myself. But the more time I spent near him, the more I suspected his words carried another meaning, something deeper. He leaned against the wooden stall now, arms folded, watching me with a half-smile that seemed equal parts curious and daring. I tried to focus on the horse, brushing a hand over its dark coat, but my chest tightened under his gaze. "You handle him better than I expected," he finally said. I turned, meeting his eyes. "Is that a compliment?" His grin widened. "Maybe. Or maybe I just didn't think you'd stay long enough to try." Something in me bristled, though not in anger. "And what makes you so sure I'd leave?" His eyes softened, and for a moment, his voice dropped to something almost tender. "Because most people do." The words hit me harder than I expected. Beneath his calm, rugged exterior, there was a loneliness I hadn't seen before. It made me want to reach out, to tell him I wasn't like most people, but I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. We left the stable not long after, walking side by side under the darkening sky. The cicadas were loud, the air thick with heat, and yet all I could hear was the uneven rhythm of my own heart. At the porch, he sat down on the steps, motioning for me to join him. I hesitated, but when I finally lowered myself beside him, I felt the space between us crackle with unspoken words. "You ever been out here at night?" he asked, tilting his head toward the open land. "No," I admitted. "What's it like?" He leaned back on his elbows, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Quiet. Almost too quiet. But if you listen close, you'll hear things most people never notice. The wind in the grass, the cattle shifting, the horses breathing in the dark. Out here, silence talks." I studied him in the fading light, the way his jaw tightened as if he were holding something back. And I wondered if silence talked, what was it saying to him right now? I wanted to ask, but the words stuck. Instead, I found myself blurting out the one question I couldn't hold anymore. "Why did you bring me here?" His eyes flicked toward mine, searching. "I thought you needed to see something different." "That's all." I pushed, my voice betraying more than I meant. He didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered, heavy and unreadable, before he finally said, "Maybe not." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, tense, filled with the weight of everything we weren't saying. My chest ached with the urge to close the space between us, but fear held me still. Then, as if sensing my hesitation, he broke the moment with a sharp change of subject. "You hungry? There's food inside." I nodded, though my appetite was gone. Inside the ranch house, the air was cooler, the faint scent of wood smoke lingering. He served dinner with simple ease: steak, beans, bread. Nothing fancy, but it tasted richer than anything I'd eaten in months. We talked more over the meal. He asked about my life in the city, and I told him pieces of it: the crowded streets, the restless nights, the sense that something was always missing. He listened quietly, nodding sometimes, his eyes never leaving mine. "You don't seem like someone who belongs to that world," he said. "And you don't seem like someone who belongs to only this one," I countered. His brow lifted at that, and for the first time, he laughed, low, deep, the kind of laugh that warmed something in me I didn't know was cold. The night stretched on, and I found myself drawn deeper into him, into the way he moved, the way he spoke, the secrets hiding behind his silences. I couldn't tell if he wanted me closer or if I was imagining it all. It wasn't until we stepped outside again that the tension snapped into something sharper. A storm was rolling in. The horizon flashed with distant lightning, thunder rumbling low across the plains. He leaned against the railing, hat tilted back, watching the sky. I stood beside him, the air thick with electricity. Then it happened. The wind picked up, carrying the first drops of rain, and as I turned toward him, a sudden crack of thunder startled the horses in the stable. They neighed, stomping wildly. He reacted instantly, pushing off the railing. "Stay here," he ordered before running toward the stables. But instinct, or maybe something stronger, pulled me after him. Inside, the horses were restless, eyes wide with fear, kicking at the stalls. He moved quickly, steadying them with his voice, his hands, his calm presence. I stood frozen for a moment, watching him command the chaos with such control it left me breathless. And then, thunder reared back violently, breaking the latch on the stall. The massive stallion lunged forward, and for a split second, I saw the danger: hooves slamming down, the weight of raw power crashing through the air. Without thinking, I moved. I shouted his name, my voice swallowed by the storm outside, and then, the stallion's eyes locked on me. Everything slowed. And in that terrifying, electric moment, I realized something. This night was about to change both of us forever. The moment Thunder's eyes locked on me, I froze. His nostrils flared, muscles quivering under his midnight coat, and for a second, I thought he was about to charge. My pulse thundered louder than the storm outside, and my body screamed at me to move. But I didn't. Then, out of nowhere, his hand grabbed my arm and yanked me back just as the stallion lunged. My boots skidded across the dirt floor, and before I knew it, my back slammed against the wooden wall of the stable. His chest pressed against mine, his breath ragged, and for a terrifying, intoxicating heartbeat, I didn't know if it was the horse I feared, or him. "Are you out of your mind?" he snapped, his voice low but cutting. "You don't stand in front of a horse like that. Ever." I swallowed hard, unable to meet his eyes. "I was trying to help." "You could have been crushed," he interrupted, his grip still tight on my arm. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." The anger in his tone was real, but underneath it, I caught something else: fear. Not just fear of Thunder's strength, but fear of losing control, of something happening that he couldn't stop. Finally, he released me, his hand dropping away as if it burned him to hold on. He turned back to Thunder, who still stomped restlessly, and placed both hands firmly on the stallion's bridle. His voice shifted, low, steady, coaxing. Within minutes, the horse calmed, its wild energy fading under the weight of his touch. I watched in silence, heart still racing, realizing how little I belonged in this world. But then, when he glanced back at me, there was something in his eyes that contradicted the harshness of his words. A softness. A flicker of something I wasn't ready to name. The storm outside raged louder, rain pounding the roof of the stable. We stood there for a while, breathing in the smell of damp earth and sweat, both too shaken to speak. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was quieter. "You don't run into danger like that. Not for me." I looked at him, my chest tightening. Maybe I wasn't thinking about danger. Maybe I was just thinking about you. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and the moment they did, I wished I could take them back. His expression shifted, surprise first, then something unreadable, something heavier. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body even through the cool, damp air. His hand hovered for a moment, as though he was going to reach for me, but then he pulled back, fists curling at his sides. "You shouldn't say things like that," he muttered. "Why not?" I asked, my voice breaking just slightly. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, running a hand over his face as if trying to erase whatever had just passed between us. The storm eased after a while, leaving the night heavy and wet. We walked back to the ranch house in silence, water dripping from the brim of his hat, mud sticking to our boots. My mind spun with everything I wanted to say but couldn't. Inside, he lit a lamp, its glow soft against the wooden walls. The house felt smaller now, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. I sat at the table, hands trembling slightly, while he poured himself a drink. "You don't belong in this mess," he finally said, his tone low, almost defeated. "City boys don't last out here. They get a taste of the silence, of the work, and then they run." I looked up at him, my chest aching. What if I'm not like them? His eyes flicked to mine, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw hope. But just as quickly it was gone. He shook his head and took a long drink as though trying to drown it. I wanted to push further, to make him admit what I was beginning to feel, but fear held me back. Instead, I asked, "Why did you really bring me into that stable?" His grip tightened around the glass, knuckles whitening. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost broken. "Because I wanted you to see a part of me I don't show people." The confession hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't talking about the horse. He was talking about himself. About his wildness, his strength, his vulnerability. Before I could respond, thunder rolled again in the distance, not from the storm, but from a truck pulling up the dirt road. Headlights cut through the window, washing the room in harsh white light. He stiffened instantly, setting the glass down with a heavy thud. "What is it?" I asked, my stomach knotting. He didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening, every line of his body on edge. Finally, he said, "It's trouble. And it's not the kind you walk away from." The sound of a door slamming shut outside made my pulse race. Whoever had arrived wasn't here for a friendly visit. He moved toward the door, every step deliberate, controlled. Then he glanced back at me, and for the first time that night, there was no mask, no guarded expression, only raw intensity. "Stay inside," he said. "No matter what you hear." And before I could ask what was happening, he was gone, stepping into the night as voices began to rise over the pounding rain. The moment the door shut behind him, I felt the weight of the house press in on me. The lamplight flickered, shadows stretching across the wooden walls as voices rose outside. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear, angry, demanding, sharp enough to slice through the heavy night air. My first instinct was to run after him, to stand by his side no matter what was happening. But his words replayed in my head, "Stay inside. No matter what you hear." I paced the room, every creak of the floorboards echoing like gunfire in my chest. My palms were slick, my breathing shallow, and I hated how powerless I felt. I pressed myself against the window, peering out through the fogged glass. 3 men stood in the rain, their boots sinking into the mud, hats pulled low against the storm. Their truck idled nearby, headlights cutting through sheets of water. One of the men jabbed a finger at him, shouting something I couldn't hear. But he didn't flinch. He stood tall, arms crossed, his hat pulled low over his eyes, his body a wall of calm against their storm. He said something in return, steady, measured, but it only made them louder. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door a crack, the cold rain rushing in, and strained to hear. "You think you can keep ignoring us?" one of them barked. His voice was thick, slurred slightly, like whiskey had sharpened his tongue. "This ain't just about you anymore." "This is my land," the cowboy replied, his voice low but firm. "And I don't owe you a damn thing." Another man stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt where something glinted in the headlights. "That's where you're wrong. You've been warned before. Don't make us warn you again." My stomach twisted. I wanted to shout, to beg him to come back inside, but I knew my voice would only draw their attention. Instead, I gripped the doorframe, every muscle in my body trembling. Then one of the men noticed the light from the house. His eyes flicked toward the window and he smirked. "You got company tonight?" The cowboy's jaw tightened, his stance shifting. "That's none of your business." The man chuckled, a cruel sound. "Guess it is now." I felt exposed, like their eyes were already on me. Panic surged through me, but before I could step back, the cowboy moved, blocking their line of sight with his body. "Leave him out of this," he said sharply. The words hit me like a spark. Leave him out of this. He wasn't just protecting me, he was claiming me, in some small, dangerous way. The men laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that eased tension. It was the kind that made it worse, that said they'd come here looking for a fight and they weren't leaving without one. One of them stepped closer, his voice rising over the storm. "You're making choices you can't take back, cowboy." For a heartbeat, the only sounds were rain hammering the ground and thunder's restless snorts from the stable. My pulse raced as I realized just how quickly this could turn violent. Finally, the cowboy spoke again, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. "Then let's make this simple. Get off my land. Now." Something in his tone must have struck them, because the men hesitated. They exchanged glances, muttering curses under their breath. Then slowly they backed toward the truck. But before climbing in, the one who had smirked earlier leaned in close, his words sharp enough for me to catch even through the storm. "This isn't over. You'll regret it." The engine roared, tires spitting mud as the truck sped off into the night, taillights vanishing into the dark horizon. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my knees nearly buckling under the weight of relief. When he finally came back inside, rain dripping from his hat and jacket, I couldn't stop myself. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Who were they?" He set his hat down on the table, water pooling beneath it, and rubbed a hand over his face. For a moment he didn't answer. "They're men who think the world owes them something," he finally said, his voice tired. "Men who don't understand the meaning of no." "That's not good enough," I pressed. "Why were they here? Why did they threaten you?" His eyes flicked to mine, and I saw it again. The guardedness, the walls he built around himself. But this time I also saw the cracks. "Because I don't bend," he said simply. "And they don't like that." I stared at him, frustration and fear battling inside me. "And what about me? They saw me here. What happens now?" His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. "Now it's more dangerous. For both of us." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but all I could do was watch as he poured another drink, his hands shaking ever so slightly. Finally I spoke, my voice quieter. "Why did you tell them to leave me out of this?" He froze, the glass halfway to his lips. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a storm fiercer than the one outside. "Because you matter," he said, the words rough, like they tore themselves out of him. I felt my chest tighten, heat rising to my face. "Do I? Or are you just saying that because of tonight?" He set the glass down hard, the sound echoing through the small house. "Don't ask questions you're not ready for the answers to." Before I could respond, a loud crash shook the porch. We both whipped toward the sound, boots stomping on wood, voices shouting. The men were back. And this time, they hadn't come alone.